I spent 14 minutes on Seal 7 because Seal 7 had given me trouble in March. That's the kind of man I am. The kind who remembers which airlock gasket showed micro-deformation 5 months ago, then builds the memory into his pre-run checklist like a ritual. I had 41 items on that checklist, handwritten on a yellow legal pad I kept in my locker because I didn't trust digital notes not to auto-correct my abbreviations. Frank Mosley, the systems engineer who kept the Nexus Collider's physical infrastructure from killing the rest of us, once told me I was the only physicist he'd met who treated a calibration run like open-heart surgery. I took it as a compliment. He hadn't meant it as one. The drill floor sat at the bottom of it all, sub-level 9, carved from the granite belly of a mountain range northwest of Mercury, Nevada. Getting there required a freight elevator that dropped 700 feet through living rock, followed by a quarter-mile walk down a corridor the construction crews had nicknamed the Throat. The walls were raw stone sprayed with sealant. The lighting was industrial fluorescent tubes mounted every 20 feet, which gave the whole passage the warmth of a parking garage at 2 in the morning. I had made this walk 400 and something times over 4 years. I still felt the weight of those 700 feet of rock every single time. The Nexus Collider itself occupied a chamber the size of a small aircraft hangar, most of it taken up by the particle track, a ring of superconducting magnets that fed energy into the bore at its center. The bore was the whole point. Everything else was just plumbing, my plumbing more or less, since the resonance equations that told the bore where to punch were mine. I had written the membrane stress models that let us perforate the boundary between parallel realities in controlled microbursts, sample atmospheric data from adjacent dimensions, seal the perforation, go home, file a report nobody outside the program would ever read. 4 years of my life had gone into making that process reliable. The Department of Energy paid handsomely for reliability. They paid nothing at all for ambition, which was why the project's real purpose, learning to extract resources from uninhabited parallel Earths, lived in memos marked with classification headers I technically wasn't supposed to acknowledge. Tonight was different. We were pushing the bore to a new membrane layer, deeper than any previous run. Layer designations meant nothing to most of the team, but to me, each layer represented a different family of parallel realities grouped by membrane density. Denser layers meant older, more divergent timelines, more exotic samples, more unknowns. I was running the 41st item on my checklist when I heard the freight elevator open at the far end of the Throat. Frank Mosley walked onto the drill floor with a thermos in one hand and a battered toolbox in the other, then went straight to the nearest terminal. He was ex-Navy, mid-50s, built like a filing cabinet. He had thick hands that moved over sensitive instrumentation with a gentleness that never stopped surprising me. He called every piece of equipment worth more than $50,000 this thing. He once diagnosed a coolant pump failure by pressing his palm against the housing, said it felt wrong, then found the exact bearing that was failing 40 minutes before the diagnostic software caught up. During a 14-hour repair session 2 years ago, he'd told me the problem with physicists was that we think the universe owes us an explanation. I liked him for that. He was the only person at the Nexus Collider I'd voluntarily eat lunch with. "Your seal log says 14 minutes on 7, he said, checking the terminal near the door. "March was 5 months ago, Liam. And it'll be 5 years ago eventually. The gasket still showed deformation." He set his toolbox on the console, opened it, tucked the thermos inside, and pulled out a wrench he didn't need. He just liked holding tools while he thought. "We've got 6 people in the mountain tonight. 2 guards topside who think we make batteries down here. 2 maintenance guys on sub-level 3 who actually make the cooling work. That leaves you and me." He looked at the bore housing. "You sure tonight's the night for a new layer?" "The resonance profile's been stable for 3 weeks. If we wait for perfect conditions, we'll be waiting when the funding review hits in September." He nodded. Frank understood budgets better than most engineers. He understood that physics happened at the speed of appropriations. I finished my checklist at 11:18. Frank finished his hardware sweep at 11:22. We spent 12 minutes verifying the bore alignment together, a procedure that required him to read gauge values from the physical instruments mounted on the bore housing, while I confirmed them against the digital readouts at the main console. The numbers matched. They always matched. I confirmed them anyway, because that is what I do. At 11:34, I initiated the calibration sequence. The particle track came alive first, a rising whine from the magnets as they achieved field strength. Then the bore itself, cycling through its warm-up phases. I watched the telemetry cascade down my screen. Membrane proximity readings, resonance amplitude, bore coherence, perforation diameter, everything nominal, everything exactly where my equation said it should be. At 11:41, the bore punched through. The new layer was immediate. The telemetry jumped, atmospheric composition readings from the adjacent dimension flooding the sample buffers. I saw nitrogen ratios I hadn't expected, trace elements I'd need weeks to catalogue. My first thought was funding. These readings would keep the project alive through September. My second thought was that the resonance amplitude was climbing in a way that didn't match my models. "Frank, the amplitude's up 11% over projection." He was at the bore housing, one hand resting on the casing. "I'm getting vibration I don't love. It's within tolerance. Your tolerance or mine?" The amplitude climbed another 4%. I ran a diagnostic subroutine, waited for the results, got nothing useful. The bore was behaving as if the membrane on the other side was thinner than expected, as if the barrier between realities was already compromised, already weakened by something I hadn't accounted for. Then the containment field shuddered, the whole signal wobbling, like a frequency being jammed by a stronger signal on the same band. I saw it in the field strength graph as a notch, a dropout lasting 0.3 seconds, long enough to mean something. "Shutting down," I said, reaching for the abort sequence. The bore flared, a burst of displaced air that shoved outward from the housing. The containment field notched again, harder, a full second this time. Something physical came through the bore. It hit the drill floor 6 feet from the base of the housing. A body. A man. He landed hard on his side, skidded on the polished concrete, stopped. Frank had his wrench up like a weapon, which under different circumstances would have been funny. I was frozen at the console with my fingers on keys that no longer mattered. The man on the floor was wearing a Nexus Collider uniform. The same grey coverall with the DOE patch on the shoulder, the same project badge clipped to the chest pocket. He was face down, shaking, his body contracting in spasms that could have been seizures or shivering. His hands were wrong. Even from 20 feet away I could see that his hands were wrong, the skin blackened, crusted with something dark that caught the overhead lights. It looked crystalline. It looked like his fingers had been dipped in volcanic glass. He rolled over. I saw my face, my nose, my jawline, the scar on my left thumb from a kitchen accident when I was 12. He was me. Exactly me. Except for the hands, which were destroyed by that black crystalline damage, and the left side of his face, where the same dark crust had spread from his jaw to his temple. One eye was clear. The other was half covered. "Frank, that's my face," I said. "I can see it." The man on the floor looked at me. He looked at the console behind me, the bore housing, the chamber ceiling. He was orienting himself. I recognized the pattern because it was my pattern. When I entered an unfamiliar room, I always checked the exits first, then the equipment, then the people. He was doing it in the same order. "Which year?" he said. His voice was mine, roughened by damage, but the cadence remained. "Which year is it?" He pushed himself upright with his forearms, keeping his ruined hands off the ground. "Tell me the month, the date. Tell me it's still alive here." Frank stepped between us. "You stay on the floor." The man, the other me, the thing wearing my face, looked at Frank the way I would have looked at Frank if Frank were standing between me and the only information that mattered. Annoyed, familiar. He knew Frank. I could see it. He knew Frank the way I knew Frank because somewhere in a different version of this mountain, he had spent 4 years working beside the same man. "It's August 2026. I said around Frank's shoulder. Your son's still burning, he said. Your son's still there. His name was Liam Kemp, my name. He had my credentials, my security clearance, my daughter's birthday, the override codes for the bore, the maintenance schedule for the cooling system on sub-level 3, the combination to my locker. He knew them all. He also knew my ex-wife's name was Sarah and that she lived in Henderson. Our daughter Chloe spent alternating weekends with me in the Tonopah apartment I rented because it was the nearest town whose school district didn't create jurisdictional problems. He knew all of it because he was me, a version of me from a parallel reality where the sun had simply wound down. Its slow, grinding heat death killed his world over 8 days. The temperature had dropped 40 degrees in the first 72 hours. By day 5, the oceans were cooling faster than the models predicted. By day 8, he had walked into his version of the Nexus Collider, reversed the bore's resonance polarity using my equations, our equations, and ridden the signal back to its source, back to a universe where the drill was still running, which meant the universe was still alive. He told me this while sitting on the drill floor with his back against the bore housing. Frank stood 4 feet away with a fire extinguisher he'd pulled from the wall mount, which was a better weapon than the wrench. I stood at the console, running every diagnostic I had, trying to understand what the bore had done. The resonance locks onto genetic signature, he said. Your equations built the frequency. Your DNA is encoded in it. Every version of you in every dying universe within range, we're all hearing the same signal, like a beacon. That's not how resonance coupling works. He shifted against the bore housing. It's exactly how it works when the membrane is thin enough. Your models don't account for degraded barriers. Mine didn't either, until my sky went dark. How many others? I don't know how many. I came through first, but I won't be the last. He flexed his damaged hands, the black crystalline crust cracking at the joints. There's a problem. Multiple identical genetic signatures in one reality. The membrane can't hold it. You get gravitational distortions, keep adding copies, you get molecular instability, spontaneous combustion of matter at the atomic bond level. Reality bleed, I said. The term came out of me before I'd thought about it. Membrane stress theory. I'd written a paper on it 6 years ago that nobody had cited because the scenario was considered impossible. You wrote the math, he said. You know I'm right. I knew he was right because the theoretical framework was mine. I understood exactly what he was describing because I had described it myself years ago in a journal that 3 people read. 2 identical genetic signatures in one local reality would create minor gravitational perturbation. 3 would escalate to visible distortion. 4 would approach molecular dissolution thresholds. There's only one stable configuration, he said, watching me with my own eyes. 1 signature per reality. The rest have to go. Frank shifted his grip on the extinguisher. He's saying he needs to kill you. He's saying one of us has to die. I looked at the version of myself with frostbite eating his face. That's what you're telling me. The physics requires it. I spent 8 days watching my world freeze, then reversed a dimensional bore by hand in a powerless, freezing laboratory where hope had already died. I came too far to share. He moved faster than I expected. The frostbite made him look slow, made me assume his whole body was compromised. His legs still worked. He came off the floor in a lunge that covered the distance between us before I could push back from the console. His target was specific. The heavy cable wrench on the tool rack behind my station, right where I would have reached because I knew it was there. Because we both knew it was there. Frank hit him from the left with the fire extinguisher. The variant took the blow across his shoulders. He stumbled but didn't go down. He got his ruined right hand on the wrench, pulled it free, swung it. The crystallized frostbite made his grip terrible. The wrench turned in his palm, struck the console housing instead of my head. Sparks jumped from the impact point. I grabbed his wrist. His skin was cold, impossibly cold through the crust, and twisted. The wrench dropped. Frank hit him again, lower, across the kidneys. He went to his knees. We pinned him with cable ties from Frank's toolbox, wrists behind his back, ankles together. The cable ties bit into the black crust on his hands. He didn't resist. He sat against the console base, breathing hard through damaged lungs, and watched me. "It doesn't matter," he said. "Restraining me changes nothing. The bore is still open. The next one will be stronger than I am." I needed something that wasn't his word or my old paper. I pulled the portable field probe from the console cradle and thumbed it into membrane diagnostic mode. The instrument was meant to find coherence leaks in the containment shell. I held it against my chest first. The display gave me background noise, pulse interference, nothing that tracked the bore. Then I brought it within a foot of him. The trace locked immediately. Every peak in the bore's standing wave repeated in the tissue reading with no measurable delay. When the containment field dipped, the signal inside him dipped with it. The trace showed a correction cycle rather than a reflection. He saw the conclusion arrive before I said it. "Don't finish that thought. The bore is doing more than keeping the perforation open." I moved the probe along his ruined arm. The black crust broke the signal into sharp harmonics, but underneath it, the same pattern continued. "It's holding your matter in phase with this reality. It brought me here." "That's not the same thing." Frank looked from the trace to the man on the floor. "What happens if it stops?" The variant's eyes stayed on me. He knew I didn't have enough data to answer. He also knew I had enough to ask the right question. I was about to ask it when a coffee mug on the secondary console began sliding toward the edge. Nobody had touched it. Nobody was near it. It moved 3 inches across a level surface, then stopped. Frank looked at the mug, looked at me. "Gravitational perturbation," I said. "2 identical signatures. It's already starting." The mug sat at the edge of the console, tipped at an angle that should have sent it to the floor. It held there, balanced on a point of distorted gravity. I watched it the way I imagine a man watches water rising toward his doorstep. The primary control station for the bore sat on sub-level 7, 2 levels up from the drill floor. Frank grabbed his toolbox and took the stairwell at a pace that made my legs burn. I spent my days in chairs, working membrane equations, and occasionally walking to the coffee machine. The stairs punished me for it. 4 years in an underground facility had not improved my cardiovascular fitness. "Override sequence from 7 should shut the bore down cold," Frank said, taking the steps 2 at a time. "Hard cutoff. Bypass the containment protocols." If the bore's still drawing power from the collider, yes. Why wouldn't it be? I didn't answer that. I was running the math in my head, the resonance behavior I'd seen on the telemetry, the way the bore had accepted the variant's transit like a door swinging open rather than a wall being breached. The frequency had stabilized after the crossing. That shouldn't happen. A perforation should destabilize, widen, collapse. This one had settled into a steady state, as if something was holding it open. The control station on sub-level 7 was a small room lined with redundant monitoring equipment. Backup terminals, hard-wired kill switches, the physical breaker panel that could cut power to the entire collider ring. I sat down at the primary terminal, pulled up the bore control interface, initiated the shutdown sequence. The bore did not respond. I ran the sequence again, full abort, emergency kill. The terminal accepted the commands. The bore ignored them. I pulled up the real-time telemetry feed. The bore was drawing 0 power from the collider. 0. The magnets were cold. The particle track was inert. The bore was sustaining itself. "That's not possible," Frank said, reading over my shoulder. One status block remained green beneath the dead power graph. Guidance hold, last validated profile. The resonance guidance core had its own battery bank, isolated from the collider breakers. It was a fail operational requirement, added after an early test lost 6 hours of sample data during a 3-second power sag. If the main system failed during a perforation, the core kept broadcasting the last stable calibration through 4 redundant optical trunks until operators could recover the run cleanly. Reliability. written into hardware. Frank tapped the green block. "You've still got signal going down? All 4 trunks are active. The guidance core has 87 minutes of battery left. The resonance loop is self-sustaining. Membrane stress from the dying universe is feeding energy back through the perforation. That energy runs the bore now. The profile only tells it what shape to hold. So cut the physical power connection. Pull the collider feeds. The collider feeds are already dead. The bore itself is a standing wave in dimensional membrane, running on energy from the dying universe. My equations shaped the resonance profile. My calibration data is still holding the wave coherent." I stared at the numbers. My numbers. My work, performing exactly as designed, doing something I had never designed it to do. I built the lock. It won't close. Frank went to the breaker panel anyway. Through every switch. The lights in the control room died, replaced by emergency reds running on battery backup. The facility's HVAC went silent. The green guidance block vanished with the terminal, but the isolated core would still be transmitting below us. Somewhere under our feet, the bore kept running on energy from the dying universe and instructions from mine. In the red-lit room, a pen rolled off the console. Then a binder. Then the secondary monitor's mount creaked as the screen tilted 15 degrees to the right on its arm. "That's getting worse," Frank said. I was about to tell him that it would keep getting worse, that 2 signatures was the minimum perturbation state, when the intercom on the wall barked, static, loud, 3 bursts, then a sound from 2 floors below that carried through the concrete, the bore discharging again. The second variant came through faster than the first. I knew this because by the time Frank and I reached the stairwell, he was already climbing toward us. I saw him in the red emergency lighting, my face again, my build, my height, but this one was different from the Frost variant. His skin was damaged in ways that made me stop on the landing. His forearms were raw, the tissue weeping through the fabric of his coverall. The left side of his neck was blistered. Radiation burns. Severe ones. He moved like a man who had been in pain so long that pain had become background noise. He saw me on the landing above him. He didn't speak. He came up the stairs. "Get to sub-level 6, I said to Frank. We ran. Desk work and equations had left me a terrible runner. My knees hurt, my lungs hurt. The emergency lighting turned every corridor into a red-washed tunnel with too many doors I couldn't remember the codes for. Except I could remember the codes, which meant he could remember them too. I ducked into the east maintenance corridor on sub-level 6, pulling Frank with me. It was narrow, lined with conduit bundles, leading to a junction that connected to the service elevator shaft. I knew this route. I had walked it during fire drills. It was the most efficient path to... The burn variant was already at the junction when we rounded the corner. He had taken the parallel corridor, the one I would have taken if I'd been chasing someone who chose the east maintenance route, because it was shorter by 40 feet. He knew my escape plan because it was his escape plan. He'd just run it in reverse. I grabbed Frank's arm, pulled him back. We retreated to the main corridor on sub-level 6. I sealed the blast door behind us using the emergency keypad. A 6-digit code I'd memorized during orientation. The keypad on the other side beeped. The blast door began cycling open. Same code. Of course the same code. "He knows everything I know," I said to Frank. "Every code, every corridor. Then stop thinking like yourself." I didn't have time to process that. The blast door opened. The burn variant came through it. Frank shoved a rolling equipment cart into the gap, a heavy, steel-framed thing loaded with diagnostic instruments worth more than my car. It caught the variant across the hips, drove him back 2 steps. He absorbed the impact with a grunt, grabbed the cart's frame, pushed it aside with a strength that surprised me, because it was my strength, and I didn't think I had it. Frank grabbed a conduit bracket from the wall, a steel L-shaped mounting piece, and swung it. The variant ducked, came in low. I was his target, the competing genetic signature that had to be eliminated. Frank was only in the way. I ran and hated it. I was a man who solved problems by thinking, not by running from them. But every thought I had was a thought he'd already had, so running was all that was left. Behind me, I heard Frank engage, heard the bracket connect with something. I looked back in time to see the steel catch the variant across the side of the neck. Frank stepped after the blow, trying to keep his body between us. The burn variant ducked under the first swing, then caught Frank's wrist before the second. He knew Frank would keep hold of a tool once he committed to it. He turned under Frank's arm, drove his shoulder into Frank's chest, and used the bracket as a lever across Frank's own body. Frank planted his boots and held. For 1 second, neither man moved. Then the shimmer near the ceiling dropped into the corridor like heat over pavement. Gravity turned sideways. Frank's feet left the floor. His right hip struck the wall first. The door frame caught him higher, under the left arm, with a flat impact that emptied his lungs. The bracket rang against concrete and spun away. Frank folded around the place he'd hit, one hand scraping for purchase while the altered gravity held him against the frame. When the field shifted again, he dropped 6 inches and landed on his side. I stopped, took 1 step back toward him. The variant kicked the bracket out of Frank's reach and moved into the space between us. Frank tried to rise. His left arm failed under him. He managed to get his back against the door frame, breathing in short, shallow pulls that told me more than an X-ray would have. The burn variant looked at Frank on the ground, looked at me. He knew what Frank meant to me. He knew because Frank meant the same thing to him. The one person in this building worth caring about. The one anchor to a normal human relationship in a life otherwise organized around equations. He positioned himself between Frank and me. He waited. He knew I wouldn't leave Frank. He knew I'd come back toward him. He knew my pattern because it was his pattern. 3 genetic signatures in one local reality. The perturbation was visible now. Small objects trembled on flat surfaces. A fire extinguisher mounted on the wall behind Frank began to glow at the edges of its casing. Molecular bonds weakening. The metal warped, then stopped as the gravity distortion shifted elsewhere. I backed away. The variant advanced. He drove me down the corridor, away from Frank, toward the stairwell. I took the stairs because I had no other choice. His footsteps kept the same pace behind me because he knew I was heading for the drill floor, 3 levels below us. I knew it was wrong. He knew I knew. Neither of us could change the shape of the mountain. Gravity pulled us both down. I emerged onto the drill floor with the bore still active at its center. The chamber was different now. The overhead lights had died with the main power, replaced by battery-fed emergency strips that cast everything in dim red. Near the bore, the light bent. Objects on the floor. Cable spools, tool cases, a discarded hard hat, sat at wrong angles, tilted by gravity fields that no longer pointed straight down. A clipboard on the far console smoked as its molecules lost cohesion at the edges. The Frost variant was still cable-tied against the console base where we'd left him. His eye followed me across the chamber. The burn variant appeared in the stairwell doorway behind me. Between him and the bore, there was nowhere to go. Every route I calculated, he had already calculated. Every hiding spot I considered, he was already dismissing because he'd considered it too. I was trapped by my own competence, by the reliability of my own mind. The bore began to flare. A third discharge was building. The air trembled, a precursor to the displacement I'd felt when the Frost variant came through. Something was coming. Someone. Another me from another dying world, carrying another apocalypse in his damaged body. The burn variant began closing the distance between us. I couldn't tell how long I had before the new arrival complicated an already impossible situation. The bore was behind me, the most dangerous object in the room, the active breach in reality itself, spitting gravitational interference, warping the space around it. Every protocol I'd ever written said stay away from the bore during an active cycle. Every version of me in every reality would say the same. I felt Frank's words in my chest, simple as a wrench. Stop thinking like yourself. The burn variant was 8 feet away, closing. I ran toward the most dangerous thing in the room. The burn variant hesitated. Maybe half a second. Maybe less. At 8 feet, that hesitation meant the difference between his hand on my throat and his hand grabbing air. Every version of Liam Kemp avoids an active dimensional breach. The bore's shear field can crack bones, stop a heart. I wrote those risk parameters myself, 5 years ago, in a safety protocol that even Frank thought was overcautious. Every variant in every dying universe had read the same document. They knew I wouldn't go near the bore. They knew it the way they knew their own middle name. I went near the bore. The gravitational distortion hit me at 6 feet out. My weight tripled for an instant. My knees buckled, my spine compressed. The floor felt like it was trying to swallow my shoes. Then it reversed. I weighed nothing. My feet skidded on concrete that no longer had the same relationship with down. The emergency strips overhead bent their light into red arcs around the bore housing, so the whole center of the chamber looked like the inside of a lens. The burn variant recovered. He came after me, but the shear field warped his path. He stepped left when he meant to step forward, fought for balance on a floor that kept changing its mind about which direction gravity pointed. I had a 2-second window that no rational plan would have produced. I grabbed the first heavy object within reach. A cable spool bracket, a steel U-shaped mounting brace, maybe 18 inches long, bolted to the base of a conduit rack that the gravity distortion had already loosened. I yanked it free. It was the wrong weapon. Too short for the distance, too heavy at one end for a clean swing. A rational man would have reached for the torque wrench on the tool rack, which was better balanced, longer, designed to be held. The burn variant was already adjusting for the torque wrench. I could see it in how he positioned his arms, guarding high, expecting the arc of a longer tool. Instinct drove the swing, low, untargeted, all force and wrongness. He dodged the wrong direction. The bracket caught him across the left knee. I felt the impact travel up through the steel into my palms. He went down on that side hard, the radiation-damaged skin on his forearm splitting against the concrete. He grabbed at my ankle with one raw hand. The weeping tissue on his fingers left wet prints on my shoe. I kicked free, ugly, desperate, a man kicking a version of himself in a room where gravity kept changing the rules. He got up despite the damage. Pain was background noise to him, and the knee slowed him, without stopping him. We circled each other near the bore. The gravitational field warped between us in visible ripples, the air itself bending light. A cable spool near the housing came apart, its plastic casing separating into fragments that drifted in the distorted gravity like rubble in water. Some of the fragments glowed briefly before going dark. Molecular bonds failing. He came at me again. Same body, same bad left knee that I'd just made worse. The difference was his arms. The radiation burns had eaten through the tissue on his forearms. His grip was weaker. His reach cost him. I could see it in how he favored his right side, protecting the worst of the damage. Two versions of the same underfed physicist grappled on a concrete floor, while the universe tried to compress us both into paste. He got his hand on my collar. I got the bracket against his chest. He pulled me down. I drove the bracket forward. The gravity field spiked. We both slammed into the floor as our combined weight quadrupled for a full second. Something in my left wrist popped. Something in his ribcage gave. He was under me. The bracket was between us, pressed against his sternum. The radiation damage on his chest was so severe that the fabric of his coverall had fused with the tissue beneath it. Where the bracket pressed, the skin split. I could see the layers underneath, pink going to white, going to something darker. I pushed. He pushed back. Same strength, same body, except his was dying from the inside, cooking in the residual radiation his world had sown into his cells. His arms failed first. The muscles in his forearms simply stopped responding. He looked up at me with my own face while the last of his leverage disappeared. I held the bracket until he stopped moving. It took longer than I wanted. I pushed myself off him. My wrist was wrong, swollen, the joint grinding when I moved it. The gravity field eased slightly as one genetic signature dropped out of the local equation. 2 remaining. The clipboard that had been smoking earlier stopped. The cable spools settled. The world got a fraction less unstable. And the reason was that I had just beaten a version of myself to death with a piece of mounting hardware. The bore discharged behind me. I'd forgotten about the third arrival in the 30 seconds it took me to kill a man. I turned. The new variant was already on his feet, 10 yards from the bore housing. He stood still, watching me. The emergency lights lit him from above. Same face, same build, but this one was different from the others in a way I noticed immediately. His skin was intact, free of frostbite and burns. He looked healthy, almost untouched, except for one thing. With every exhale, a thin, luminescent mist left his lips. Pale green visible in the dim red light, dispersing slowly in the still air. His lungs were processing something that wasn't oxygen. Some atmospheric contaminant from a world that had choked itself. He looked at the burn variant's body on the floor. Looked at me, standing over it with a bloody bracket in my hand. "You're adapting," he said. I didn't answer. I adjusted my grip on the bracket. The irrational approach. I worked it out on the other side. He took a breath. The green mist curled from his mouth. Took me about 4 days. If you can't outthink yourself, stop thinking. Become unpredictable. It's elegant. He paused. It's also a one-time trick. Now that I know you know it, your chaos has a pattern. You'll go for the wrong door, the wrong tool. Predictably wrong is still predictable. 3 genetic signatures in one local reality again. The count had returned to what it had been before I killed the burn variant, but the chamber had not returned with it. The earlier distortion had already weakened concrete, fasteners, insulation, every stressed bond in range. Smog's transit drove a fresh correction wave through damaged matter, and the gravity field slammed back harder than before. A section of the drill floor ceiling cracked, a structural fracture that sent a plate-sized chunk of concrete falling in a slow, wrong-speed arc, drifting sideways before hitting the floor 20 feet from where it should have landed. The emergency strips buzzed, failed, came back dimmer. The bore housing itself groaned, the metal warping. The frost variant, still cable-tied at the console, made a sound. A grunt of pain. I looked over. The skin on his undamaged cheek was reddening, as if exposed to intense heat. 3 signatures were enough to restart the bleed. The damage already done was making each recurrence less survivable. "We're all dying in here," the Smog variant said. He hadn't moved. "The question is who dies from the bleed and who dies from you. Or I shut the bore. You would have tried shutting the bore from the sub-level 7 terminal. It's the rational first move, and it doesn't work." His gaze shifted to my injured wrist. "The calibration feed is holding the resonance coherent. You can't override it from the console." He was right. He would be. "So what's your plan?" I said. He smiled. It was my smile, which I have never liked on anyone. "Same as yours. Get the other signatures out. Be the last one standing. Except I'm going to do it patiently, because I can afford to. My lungs are damaged, not my brain. And you—" He nodded at my wrist. "You're getting slower." He let me leave the drill floor. That was the part I couldn't figure out for a full minute as I climbed the stairwell toward sub-level 8, listening for footsteps behind me. He had a clear shot. I was injured, slower, carrying a bracket in my offhand because my left wrist couldn't grip anymore. He could have attacked. He had chosen to watch instead. The frost variant had panicked, and the burn variant had attacked through pain. Smog's world had died over weeks, giving him time to run every model and consider every angle. He wanted to see where I went, what I reached for, what my next move was. Once he saw it, he could counter it. The stairwell between sub-levels 8 and 9 was dark. The emergency strips on this level had failed entirely. The battery backup drained, or the bleed had eaten the wiring. I moved by touch. One hand on the wall, the bracket tucked under my injured arm. The concrete was warm, molecular friction at the structural level. The mountain's own rock beginning to vibrate at frequencies it was never designed to sustain. I reached sub-level 8. Utility distribution. Conduit runs, cable chases, junction boxes. The nervous system of the facility. carrying data and power between the control level above and the drill floor below. Everything Frank serviced. Everything Frank understood better than I did, because Frank dealt with physical infrastructure while I dealt with equations. The intercom on the wall of the sub-level 8 corridor was still active, battery-powered, hardwired, independent of the main electrical system. When it crackled, I almost swung the bracket at it. "Liam, you still down there?" Frank's strained but coherent voice came from the intercom panel near the utility chase entrance. I pressed the talk button. "Sub-level 8, where are you?" "I'm on 6. I can't walk far. My ribs are bad." I heard him shift, heard the grunt he tried to suppress. "I've been thinking about the bore. It's self-sustaining. I can't shut it down from the terminal. You said the calibration data is holding the resonance coherent. Your equations are keeping the wave patterns stable. That's the problem. That's the solution, Liam. The calibration feed runs on fiber through the utility chase on 8, 4 trunk lines. They carry the resonance profile from the guidance system to the bore. Cut the trunks, and the bore loses its pattern." He coughed. "The wave loses coherence, then the breach collapses." I stared at the utility chase hatch 6 feet from where I stood. Behind it, somewhere in the bundled infrastructure of sub-level 8, were the fiber optic trunk lines that carried my life's work to the bore. My equations, my calibration data, my resonance profile, the mathematical architecture that made cross-dimensional perforation possible. 4 years of research, compressed into light pulses running through glass threads thinner than a human hair. If I sever those trunks, the bore collapse could be uncontrolled. A resonance implosion at that energy density could crack the chamber. The drill floor shielding should contain it, but I can't promise it will." Frank coughed again. "I can feel the floor moving up here, Liam. Whatever the bleed is doing, it's getting into the structure. You don't have time to find a clean option." The men on 3. Silence, then the scrape of Frank dragging his toolbox closer. Main intercom below 5 is gone. The refuge alarm on 3 is a hardwired loop. Its return pair passes this corridor. I can bridge into it from 6 and trip their shelter door, maybe close the upper blast gate before the collapse reaches it. With one hand, I only need the one that works. I heard the toolbox latch, metal against concrete, then the small, precise click of wire strippers. Frank had broken ribs, an arm he couldn't use, and a gravity field trying to pull the facility apart. He was still looking for a circuit he could repair. "How long?" "Longer than you have. Go to the chase. I'll give them what warning I can." He was right. The theoretical physicist in me wanted to model the collapse, run simulations, calculate the energy release. The man who had just beaten a version of himself to death with a bracket wanted to cut the trunks and run. Neither version got to know whether everyone else would survive the choice. "There's another one," I said. "A third variant. He's somewhere between me and the drill floor. Can you get to the chase?" "He'll expect me to go for the sub-level 7 terminal. That's the rational target." "Then don't go for the terminal." I almost laughed. After years in the Navy and engineering, Frank had reduced my impossible physics problem to a plumber's answer: cut the pipe. I pulled the utility chase hatch open. The chase was a narrow shaft lined with bundled cables, fiber runs, conduit, cooling pipes, everything that connected the upper facility to the lower levels, packed into a vertical corridor barely wide enough for a man to stand. The fiber trunks would be marked with yellow jacketing, bundled in a protective sleeve, running along the east wall. I found them 12 feet in, 4 lines, each one a thread of glass carrying the resonance mathematics that held a breach between universes open. They were clipped to the wall, with standard cable ties at 2-foot intervals, protected by a nylon sleeve that any maintenance tech could cut with a utility knife. My only tool was a steel bracket with blood on it. The corridor intercom crackled behind me. Frank's voice came through thin and broken by static. "Upper gate is moving. No return from 3 yet." Then the line went dead. Behind me in the corridor I heard breathing. Then I saw it. A soft green glow reflected off the walls of the chase entrance. The smog variant's luminescent exhale, creeping around the corner like something with its own intentions. He was here. He'd followed. Of course he'd followed. He hadn't let me go. He'd tracked me, waiting to see what I reached for. Now, he knew. "You're in the chase," he said from the corridor. "Going for the trunk lines, I considered that. It's a brute force solution, messy enough to bring the ceiling down on both of us." Green mist brightened at the entrance. "It's the kind of thing Frank would suggest." I didn't answer. I hooked the bracket under the fiber bundle and pulled. The cable ties held. The nylon sleeve resisted. I yanked harder, bracing my foot against the wall. My injured wrist screamed. "Liam!" An uncontrolled collapse could kill Frank and the men on sub-level 3. The green glow moved closer. "Is that rational?" I pulled with everything I had. 2 cable ties snapped. The nylon sleeve tore part way. I could see the yellow jacketing of the fiber trunks underneath. The green glow was at the chase entrance now. He was there, filling the narrow opening. "Don't cut it," he said. I looked at him. My face, clean-skinned, undamaged except for whatever the pollution had done to his insides. He breathed, and the green mist caught the dim light, hanging between us in the narrow chase. His gaze stayed on the bracket and the fiber bundle. "You're right," I said. "It's not rational." I slammed the bracket down on the fiber bundle. The first trunk snapped. A bright, silent break. The glass fiber separating with a clean pop that I felt through the bracket more than I heard. The second trunk went with it. The smog variant lunged into the chase. The space was too narrow for him to build momentum. I brought the bracket down again. Third trunk. The surviving line took the full guidance load. Light pulsed through its yellow jacket, white, blue, and rapid, and the entire chase began to hum at the bore's coherence frequency. Gravity pulled sideways. My shoulder struck the cable rack. The remaining trunk bowed away from the wall but held. The smog variant grabbed my injured wrist and pinned it against a conduit. The joint ground under his hand. With his other forearm, he covered the last trunk and denied me access to the only thing that mattered. "No return from 3, he said. Green mist spilled across my face. "You cut this without knowing who you're burying." He was right, which made the pressure of his hand worse. I let the bracket fall. His eyes tracked it down. He expected me to reach for it, swing wrong, perform another piece of deliberate chaos he had already modeled. Instead, I dropped with it. I hooked the open end under the last trunk behind his guarding arm and jammed the heavy end against the conduit rack. A lever. Frank's kind of tool, even when it wasn't a tool at all. The variant understood and drove his knee into my chest. My head hit the pipe behind me. White light erased the chase for a fraction of a second. I kept both hands on the bracket, even the broken one, and pushed with my legs. The nylon sleeve stretched. One wall clip tore free. The variant grabbed the bracket and pulled against me. Same body, different damage, both of us braced in a shaft too narrow to turn around. The final trunk brightened until I could see the bones of his fingers through the green-lit skin. Then the glass inside it parted. The last fiber snapped. For a moment nothing happened. Then the mountain moved. The bore collapsed inward. An inversion, a sound below hearing, a pressure change that felt like the air had been sucked out of the room and then shoved back in twice as hard. The walls of the chase flexed. Concrete dust rained from above. The gravitational distortion vanished all at once. Full stop. Like a switch being thrown. Every object that had been floating, drifting, tilting at wrong angles suddenly remembered where down was. I heard crashes from the drill floor one level below. Everything that had been suspended by the distortion field hitting the ground at once. The smog variant was on his knees in the chase entrance. He had been reaching for me when the collapse hit. Now he was looking at his hands. The skin on his fingers was splitting from the inside. The cells were separating, coming apart along boundaries I couldn't see. The tissue between his knuckles opened in thin lines, bloodless at first, then red. He held his hands up in the dim emergency light and turned them as the process advanced. "It doesn't hurt," he said. "I thought it would hurt." It moved up his arms. The fabric of his coverall sank inward as the tissue beneath it lost density. His face, my face, changed. The skin loosened. The structure underneath was softening, dissolving, the bone losing its mineral hardness in a wave that moved from his extremities toward his center. He sat back against the chase wall. His breathing accelerated, the green mist coming faster now, brighter, as his lungs processed whatever atmospheric damage they carried at an accelerating rate. "Tell Frank," he started. He didn't finish. What was left of him settled against the wall, the way a wet garment settles when the body inside it is removed. Slowly, unevenly, with a finality that made me look away before the process completed, because I knew what my own face looked like, and I didn't need to see it come apart. I sat in the chase for what felt like a long time but was probably 40 seconds. Then I crawled out into the sub-level 8 corridor and took the stairs down. The drill floor was wrecked. The bore housing had buckled inward during the collapse, a ring of warped steel surrounding the place where the breach had been. The breach was gone. Gravity had steadied, the shear had vanished, and the light ran straight again. The air was still. The emergency strips cast their steady red over a floor covered in rubble. Fallen tools, cracked concrete, shattered equipment, the remnants of everything the bleed had been slowly dismantling. The burn variant's body was where I had left it, still solid, still intact. He had died before the collapse. The universe had no reason to reject him. He was already gone. The Frost variant was different. The cable ties were on the floor, still closed in their loops, but the man they'd held was gone. A wet residue marked the concrete where he'd sat. The black crystalline frostbite that had covered his hands had survived the dissolution. Dark fragments of it sat in the residue like stones in a riverbed. I stared at them. They were the only solid thing left of a man who had crossed between universes to escape the death of his son. And they were the damage that his universe had done to him. The disease had outlasted the patient. I found the stairwell, climbed. My wrist was swollen to twice its normal size. My head ached where I'd hit the conduit pipe. I had bruises I hadn't catalogued yet, and a cut on my right palm from the bracket that I noticed only because the railing was wet where I gripped it. Sub-level 6, the corridor where Frank had gone down. He was where I'd left him, propped against the doorframe. He'd shifted, worked himself into a sitting position with his back against the wall, his bad arm cradled across his chest. His toolbox was open beside him. A stripped copper pair ran from the wall intercom into a safety relay box he'd pried open with a screwdriver. Even broken, the man was fixing things. A small amber indicator on the relay blinked twice. "Return from 3, he said before I could ask. Each word cost him a breath. Both maintenance stations acknowledged. Refuge door closed. Upper gate made it down before the signal went. The 2 guards were topside beyond the gate. Along with the 2 maintenance men on 3, all 4 had at least been given a chance to survive it. "Bores down," I said. He looked at me, looked at the bracket in my hand, the blood on my clothes, the wrist held crooked against my chest. "How many?" "All of them. The collapse took 2. I took 1. He nodded, leaving the question unasked. I had no answer I was willing to give. He reached into his toolbox, pulled out the thermos he'd brought onto the drill floor 100 years ago when this was still a calibration run. He unscrewed the cap one-handed, poured coffee into it, held it up. "Shift's not over for another 4 hours, he said. I took the coffee and sat across from him, in the corridor of a facility that would never operate again, facing a man who had solved the greatest crisis of my career by telling me to cut a pipe. The coffee was cold. I drank it anyway because it was in my hand, someone had given it to me, and those 2 facts were enough. My yellow legal pad was in my locker on sub-level 9. 41 items, 14 minutes on Seal 7. Every precaution I had ever taken, every protocol I had ever written. All of it had been useless tonight. The only things that had worked were the things I would never have planned. The wrong weapon. The wrong approach to the wrong problem, executed badly by a man operating on instinct he'd never developed until an hour ago. Frank was watching me. "You look different," he said. "I'm covered in blood, Frank." "That's not what I mean." I knew what he meant. After finishing the coffee, I set the thermos cap on the floor beside me. Above us, somewhere in the mountain, the surface security team was probably trying to figure out why the intercom wasn't answering on the lower levels. They'd work their way down eventually. They'd find the drill floor. They'd find the body. They'd want reports, explanations, documentation. They'd want the kind of orderly accounting that I had once been very good at. I sat with Frank in the corridor. My checklist stayed untouched, and whatever I said would come without a plan. I just waited, which was something the man who'd started this shift would never have been able to do.